A Heinkel He-111 medium bomber darts in and out of the mists above the French coast. The pilot squints in a vain attempt to see through the foggy windshield, and grits his teeth as anti-aircraft shells pierce the low-hanging clouds below. As the Heinkel settles into its attack run, shrapnel rattles the fuselage. Even with dozens of Royal Navy destroyers filling the air with flak, the civilian ships crowding Dunkirk harbor are an irresistible target for the pilot. The bomb bay doors open directly over the hapless French steamer, from which men spill out into the ocean waters, even as certain death awaits them. As the ship is consumed by a seething inferno, the Heinkel disappears back into the fog bay. Before we delve into this topic, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Rise of Kingdoms, a free historical RTS game with millions of players across the world, available on the App Store and Google Play Store. Start a battle anytime, anywhere. Choose from one of 11 historical civilizations, each with its own unique units, and lead your people to glory against other players. Call upon dozens of historical figures to serve as your trustworthy commanders. From Julius Caesar to Sun Tzu to Joan of Arc. Battles happen in real time on a huge detailed map that requires you to account for natural obstructions like rivers and mountains. Join an alliance of up to 170 players and compete in the Osiris League for lucrative in-game rewards. Support my channel by clicking the link in the description below and use the code on screen to claim the prizes you see here. It is May 1940, and the Second World War looks as though it will be over by Christmas. The Manstein Plan had accomplished in weeks what the Schlieffen Plan never could. The Maginot Line had been bypassed, and the impregnable Belgian fortress of Eben Emael had fallen to a handful of German paratroopers. Generals such as Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel were teaching Europe to flinch at the very mention of panzer tanks, while the Luftwaffe seemed to have no equal in the skies above Belgium and France. On every front, the enemy was either in full retreat or being encircled. The lowland countries, once so troublesome during the Great War, were little more than speed bumps on the road to Paris. At the Battle of Sedan, the Luftwaffe conducted the largest bombing campaign in history, flying nearly 4,000 individual sorties against enemy positions and causing thousands to flee in panic. As the French line collapsed, Army Group A, under General Gerd von Rundstedt, started to drive a massive wedge between the bulk of the French army and the British Expeditionary Force, which had recently landed in Flanders. The offensive was not intended to last long, but the impetuous panzer generals, Rommel and Guderian, openly defied orders and plunged straight towards the Channel, leaving chaos and devastation in their wake. But the Allies were not intent to sit idly by and allow the Germans to encircle them. On May 21st, 2,000 French and British soldiers intercepted two of Rommel's panzer divisions and an Alsace division at the Battle of Arras. Although briefly startled by the bold move, Rommel quickly rallied his men and forced the Allied troops to retreat under the cover of darkness. Far from delaying the German advance, the counterattack simply encouraged Rommel and Guderian to reach the coast as fast as possible. The German force was like a bull in a china shop, and the Allies were the fly buzzing in its ear, inadvertently causing the ensuing devastation. Meanwhile, as General Fedor von Bock, commander of Army Group B, dealt with Belgian resistance to the east, mechanized elements of Army Group A continued thundering west at breakneck speed. Guderian's panzers plowed through two unprepared British divisions on the 19th, capturing vital bridgeheads over the Somme and then swinging north towards Boulogne and Calais. As a result of these decisive maneuvers, German forces had an encirclement at Dunkirk firmly established by the 22nd. Despite this unparalleled advance, the German soldier scarcely had time to dip his aching feet into the soothing waters of the English Channel before British evacuation ships appeared on the horizon. Although Luftwaffe bombers had already destroyed the port facilities, British and French men began lining up on the seawall and beaches of Dunkirk, waiting to board the boats deployed by the larger ships as they reached the shallow harbor. Initially, the Germans were unconcerned. These were not the mighty battleships of the Royal Navy, but a ragtag assortment of destroyers and transports, obviously scraped together last minute to evacuate a few thousand key personnel. But as time wore on, more and more ships started to trickle in, and the trickle became a deluge. Generals and admirals alike began scratching their heads, all pondering the same question. Where on earth had the British acquired so many transports? Then, as reports from Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights began to trickle in, the stage was set for one of the most controversial decisions of the war. You live in the past. Our new way of conducting war has proven itself again and again. Would you prefer it if my tank crews would get out and shovel trenches? I am inclined to believe that our previous results speak for themselves. The enemy has repeated itself as unable to react to our rapid advance. Conversely, any delay gives the British and French time to organize a counteroffensive like the one I withdrew at Utrecht. You both describe your capabilities, but I know how thin our lines have become. What guarantee do I have that the French will not simply retreat over the summit while you play in the canal? My Führer, that doesn't make any sense. The Luftwaffe can be finished with the British. Just one word and my Air Force troops will deal with our little problem. Really? And how many prisoners have your Stukas so far carried away in their pilot cannons? Goering? Some of Kleist's armored divisions have already suffered 50% losses. What's the point of winning this battle if we lose the war against France? The French Luftwaffe is already hardly more than a nuisance. In contrast to the army, I can guarantee results without serious danger to our campaign. We can't waste any more time with this debate. My Führer, it's up to you. What are your orders? On May 24th, the skies above Flanders began to fill with an ever-increasing swarm of German fighters, the whine of their massed propellers almost loud enough to deafen observers below. Goering had won his art. Army Group A would halt, and the mighty Luftwaffe would bomb Dunkirk and the evacuation fleet into submission. Although the tank crews were grateful for the respite, their officers made no pretense of agreeing with Hitler's new strategy. General Franz Halder wrote in his diary, "The air force on which all hopes are pinned is dependent on the weather." This divergence of views resulted in a tug-of-war, which costs more nerves than it does actual conduct of the operations. However, the battle will be won this way or that. The reasons behind Hitler's decision to halt the advance of the German armor on May 24th are hotly debated to this day. While good arguments have been made on all sides, a lot of it boils down to sagte, das sagte. And although it's undoubtedly true that Hitler made many crucial errors during the war, his decision to halt the ground forces at Dunkirk was not entirely without merit. The Wehrmacht was in serious danger of becoming a victim of its own success. Their advance had stretched German supply lines and left the panzer divisions short on fuel and ammunition. The men were exhausted, the tanks ill-suited for urban warfare, the infantry lagging behind the armor, and the artillery lagging behind the infantry. It's also worth mentioning that after the war, those German generals who survived the conflict frequently ascribed to Hitler their own mistakes, resulting in even further misinformation regarding Hitler's decision-making. As one example, Panzer General Kleist of Army Group stated later, "I must say that the English managed to escape that trap in Dunkirk, which I laid only with the personal help of Hitler. The fact of the matter is that the English would have been unable to get into Dunkirk because I had them covered. Then Hitler personally ordered that I should withdraw my troops." When General Kleist met Hitler a few days after the evacuation, he was so furious he dared to remark that a great opportunity had been lost at Dunkirk. Hitler, in a perhaps uncharacteristic display of flippancy, calmly replied, "That may be so, But I did not want to send the tanks into the Flanders marshes. And besides, the British won't come back in this war. Initially, it seemed like Hitler's assumption had merit. The British were fleeing in droves, scrambling aboard their ships while being repeatedly strafed by enemy Luftwaffe fighters that broke through their air defenses. One German pilot wrote after the war, "I hated Dunkirk. It was just cold-blooded killing. The beaches were jammed with soldiers. I went up and down spraying them with bullets." But as the days wore on, it became clear to observers that, despite Göring's assurances, various factors had drastically limited the effectiveness of the Luftwaffe. The Dunkirk pocket was far enough from German airfields that fighters and dive bombers like the Messerschmitt Bf-19 and the Junkers Ju-87 needed to expend the majority of their fuel just to reach the area. Twin-engine bombers, such as the Heinkel He-111, had an even shorter flight time, leaving no room for error during attack runs that were already made frustratingly inaccurate. Due to the thick, low-hanging clouds shrouding the harbor. During dogfights, the Bf-109 flew faster than the British Hawker Hurricane and had much better camouflage. However, German pilots quickly came to hate the Supermarine Spitfire, which had better performance at higher altitudes. But even with the Luftwaffe throwing almost 1,000 fighters and bombers at a foe, only mustering half that number, British transport ships continued to slip away through the fog. Furious with the situation, Wehrmacht Commander-in-Chief Walter von Brauchitsch dared to challenge Hitler's decision to restrict the advance of Army Group A. With great reluctance, Hitler actually agreed, rescinding the order on May 26th. Finally let off the leash, Rundstedt immediately began plans to advance. However, that same day, Army Group B, which had been pincering the British from the east, launched a major attack across the Ypres-Cummins Canal. Realizing he was faced by a mere 2 divisions, General Fedor von Bock ordered a massive artillery and dive bomber attack, then an advance by 3 of his own divisions. Hectic fighting ensued all along the canal, and for a moment, it seemed as if the Germans would successfully break through the British flanks and encircle several battalions of troops. But eventually the enemy had their backs to the wall, and an account from the battle from the 41st Panzer Corps vividly illustrates the situation. At every position, heavy fighting has developed. In consequence, the Corps has not been able to make any notable headway to the east or northeast. Casualties in personnel and equipment are grievous. The enemy are fighting tenaciously, and to the last man remain at their posts. If they are shelled out of one position, they shortly reappear in another. But despite their fierce defense, the British quickly began falling back. German troops stormed across the canals, only for Royal artillery shells to begin raining down on them. Even so, every soldier knew that they were on the cusp of victory, unlike anything the Kaiser could have dreamed of, and they pushed forward with dogged determination. Soon after, the Luftwaffe avenged the sacrifices made by the ground troops when they spent 2 hours bombing and strafing Allied columns as they advanced to retreat across one of only 2 bridges on the Isère Canal. A huge number of British vehicles were either destroyed or abandoned, and subsequent attacks disabled a large portion of their artillery, allowing the German infantry to breathe a collective sigh of relief. Although the British and French were now falling back, advancement on the eastern flank was still hampered by a large concentration of Belgian troops. But unwilling to sacrifice thousands more lives in an obviously futile gesture of defiance, Belgian King Leopold III, who was himself commanding troops, agreed to an unconditional surrender on the afternoon of the 28th. Taking advantage of this situation, von Bock ordered a swift advance, managing to catch 3 British divisions by surprise as they attempted to reposition. The eastern flank was now in disarray, with British lines slowly but surely falling back before the seemingly unstoppable German war machine. Meanwhile, on the western flank, Rundstedt had required nearly 16 hours to prepare for his own offensive maneuvers. Early on the 27th, he had sent the panzers surging forward across the Isère Canal. Results were immediate, with Erwin Rommel brilliantly outmaneuvering the retreating French forces and isolating nearly 35,000 men in the town of Lille. The jaws of the German trap were now closing shut, driving the Allies back into a defensive line a mere 7 miles or 11 kilometers from the coast, with Dunkirk at the center. Throughout this period, the Luftwaffe continued to harass the British evacuation fleet, dropping an estimated 45,000 bombs during its 12 major raids on the Dunkirk pocket. But for all of Göring's bluster, he proved unable to command the weather, which remained mostly overcast until June 1st. As von Haller put it in his diary, "The bad weather has grounded our air force, and now we must stand by and watch how countless thousands of the enemy are getting away to England right under our noses." As bullets filled the air over Dunkirk, so too did heated words fill the air back at German high command. Hitler was by now thoroughly fed up with what he saw as an atmosphere of mistrust and insubordination, and took swift action to rectify the situation. Impetuous men like Heinz Guderian were reassigned to the south, while the forces encircling Dunkirk were placed under the control of General Georg von Küchler, whom Hitler regarded as a much more steady and reliable officer. Although Küchler quickly ordered an assault, his lack of familiarity with the new command resulted in a breakdown of communications. In spite of these issues, the Germans achieved a major victory on the first day of June, when they finally overran the French force defending the town of Lille. Despite being encircled days earlier, the defenders had required 7 full divisions, or 160,000 men, to fully isolate and contain them. With these divisions free to join the main attack, victory was inevitable. And as the weather cleared, the sky turned black with Luftwaffe planes eager to avenge their fallen comrades. Yet, against all odds, the remaining 40,000 members of the French First Army continued to resist amid the smoking rubble and greeted every German advance with a hail of gunfire. The final French redoubt at Porte des Dunes held out until June 3rd, its garrison only surrendering after German bombs had all but leveled the structure. A day later, German forces finally captured the harbor, just in time to watch the last British transport ship steam away into the Channel. As the dust settled, the Germans finally had time to count their losses. Although 20,000 brave men had been sacrificed to collapse the Allied pocket, the enemy had lost 3 times that number, and the Germans had captured at least 100,000 French POWs. Arguments rage to this day over the exact number of planes lost during the engagement, but Göring confidently claimed that his brave pilots had achieved a favorable kill ratio in every encounter and inflicted severe casualties on the evacuation fleet. The Germans also captured a vast quantity of Allied war material. There had been no room on the civilian transport ships for vehicles of any sort, and these now clogged the roads for miles in every direction. Tanks, trucks, armored cars, artillery and motorcycles, many still fueled and loaded with ordnance. For the rest of the war, vehicles stolen from the British Expeditionary Force would serve in the Wehrmacht on every front, from the scorching deserts of Africa to the coldest depths of Russia. Dunkirchen ist gefallen. 40,000 Franzosen und Engländer sind als letzter Rest einziger großer Armeen gefangen. Unübersehbares Material wurde erbeutet. Damit ist die größte Schlacht der Weltgeschichte beendet. Of course, while Hitler was basking in the adoration of the German public, his officers were lamenting opportunities they believed to have been lost due to his meddling. The Battle of Dunkirk was a German victory, but many in the Wehrmacht remained convinced that it could have been more decisive if their superiors had been willing to take more risks. Even so, as the war raged on, the memories of Dunkirk would linger in the minds of both sides as a great victory. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see our video on the invasion of Poland from the Polish perspective, which will be out in just a few short weeks.